Good evening. Good evening, South Africa. Good evening, Africa. And good evening, the entire world. And welcome to the Real Dialogue. I've got to, I have got to admit that this is one conversation that I have been looking so looking forward to. And one of the reasons for that is precisely because of the person that I'm going to be speaking to, and how their story has impacted my life at a very personal level. And so I trust that you'll be inspired. And as you know, that today we are in conversation with the one and the only, the retired Constitutional Court judge, Justice Edwin Cameron, and now serving as the Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. And we're going to be speaking about all of that: his life, his work, and his views on Africa, his passion for Africa, and his life of service and activism. And we're going to be speaking about all of that. And I trust and I hope that you will find this inspiring, you will find this challenging, and that you will walk away from this hour a better person than you are now. As you know, the Real Dialogue is an initiative of the Real Village, and it is in keeping with our mission, which is to reconstruct and empower Africa with love. We don't just celebrate people that are successful. We don't just get to speak to people that are successful, but we are speaking to people that have used their success, the platforms that they have, the education that they've been blessed with, the doors that they've got access to use those as a platform to serve others, especially those that are often neglected, the poor, the last, and the least. And Justice Edwin is an embodiment of that. And I am so happy to welcome him right now. And there he is. Justice Edwin. Welcome, my friend. How are you doing?
Pastor Sibuyile, I am honored and delighted. And I would like to start by making a very personal comment. We met by chance at Cape Town International Airport a few months ago before the lockdown. And it was a deeply emotional meeting for both of us. You told me that you had read my book, and I was overcome with the emotion of love and fullness and truth as a human being that you were able to convey to me. I'm even getting emotional now, but I'm a judge and a lawyer, so I'm not going to be emotional. But I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the love and generosity that I know that you bring in your pastoral care and in your ministry and in your teaching and in your whole being. So that's my opening speech, and that's the end of it.
Wow, you're going to get me emotional now. And this is not supposed to be about me, it's about you. But thank you so much. I receive that. I really receive that, especially coming from you. So yeah, finally we are able to do this. And where do we start? For those of you who don't know, and I don't know if anybody does not know who Justice Edwin Cameron is, and as I've mentioned earlier on, he's now retired as a judge in the Constitutional Court. And since late last year, I remember when it was first mentioned, September, that you will be Chancellor of Stellenbosch University, that great institution with so much history. We'll speak about that later on. But before we get to your work, who is Edwin Cameron? Where were you born, your childhood? And talk to me about that.
I'm happy to say that introduction will bring in an Eastern Cape link. I came from a fractured family and from a poor white family, and my parents couldn't care for my sisters and me, so we ended up in a children's home in Queenstown. Kumani. And I spent 4.5 years there, from the ages of just before I turned 7 until I was about 11.5. And of course, what has shaped my life is poverty, whiteness. I sit here in all my full glory as an Umlungu, a white person. And of course, also at an early stage, what shaped me was the unwelcome realization that I was different in my sexual orientation, not by choice, not by adoption, not by embracing. In fact, for the first 16 years of my life after realizing this, I resisted it. So it's marginalization as a poor person, but a poor person who got my big breaks in life because of my white skin. So let us think back to how many poor kids there were in the Eastern Cape, the eastern part of the then Cape province, between 1960 and 1965. And let us think how many of them got the breaks that I got, Pastor. I got a break when I was 14. I started at Pretoria Boys High School. Wonderful school, all white. I went from Pretoria Boys High after a year in the South African Defence Force. I went to Stellenbosch, all white. At Stellenbosch, I got the Rhodes Scholarship. Another Eastern Cape link, Pastor, is that my very dear friend, beloved friend, Loisa Nonga, was the first Black African South African to be elected to a Rhodes Scholarship 2 years after me. And we met at Oxford, and our friendship has continued. It's a close and intimate friendship, even though I haven't spoken to him for a while. So, and then at Oxford, something happened with another Eastern Cape link, which was that Stephen Bantu Biko was beaten to death. Why was he beaten to death? Because he was proud and Black. And he was an activist for Black empowerment, for Black liberation from poverty, from white supremacism. And I read his works for the first time at Oxford. They were banned here. And that had a profound impact on my life. And I came back after Oxford, and I was a human rights advocate. I did cases in the Eastern Cape for a big union at the time in the Eastern Cape, an ANC-affiliated Eastern Cape union. And I did other cases in the Eastern Cape as well. So I don't know why this is a nationwide broadcast, but there I am, Pastor Sibuyile, and what a joy to be speaking to you. Thank you for giving me that opportunity.
I'm the one that is honored, and let me try and not personalize this and not limit it to the Eastern Cape. And so boys school and Pretoria, and then you went to Oxford, and I read that you did quite well there academically as well. But what were you like at school, in primary school? What were you like academically? Were you?
I was a nerd, yes. I did play rugby, but without distinction.
Sure.
But for me, the key to emerging from poverty was to become a brainy, hardworking academic boy, and I did that. And that's why I also worked so hard at Oxford.
Sure.
So the key for me, the way out, was to do well. But of course, to do well, you've got to have the institutional means and the government backing. Both Pretoria Boys High and Stellenbosch were lavishly supported by the apartheid government as white institutions of excellence. And I had those opportunities, and I'll never forget it. My poverty, my race, my sexual orientation, and then we will come back to the last fourth specific factor which has shaped my life. And that, of course, is the HIV epidemic.
Sure. No,
but
definitely.
That in due
course. Yeah, definitely. You know what? I've actually done something very crazy with this particular conversation that I'm having with you. Normally, I've got a list of questions and a thread through which I want to go. But based on our previous conversations, way before we even started to prepare for this conversation, we have found a way of being authentic and honest and speak about issues without being guided by scripts. So I'm going to be doing that now. It's something very crazy. So really, this is our conversation, you and me, and with our friends eavesdropping on that conversation. So no script. If I'm writing something that you are saying that I want us to get back to. So it's going to be flowing, and I hope you are fine with that.
Very.
Okay, wonderful. Now, have you always known that it's going to be long?
That it's going to be long?
No, that is going to be law that you will spend your life doing.
I went to Oxford to study classics, but I was driven to law. I was driven by the impelling sense that I wanted to live a life of use to others. That was, it sounds high flown, but I believe the legal system, and that's a view that Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo shared. The legal system was abused by apartheid. Apartheid law was a misuse of the law, and they believed, and they were the heirs to the whole public interest law movement in South Africa. Mandela and Tambo, probably the most famous law firm established in South Africa in the 1950s after the Defiance Campaign by the young Nelson Mandela. So that tradition was kept alive in South Africa throughout apartheid. And the unions used it, the freedom fighters used it, the ANC fighters used it, COSATU used it, the UDF used it. And so I was driven to it reluctantly, Pastor. I would have liked to do other things. I went to Oxford to study literature, to study Latin and Greek, but after 3 months, I changed to law. And that was more than 40 years ago. And since then, it's been law.
Wow. Now let's then go back to the 3 tenets that you've aptly used to describe your person and who you are and who you've been growing up. The first one, whiteness. And a lot of people, struggle with accepting the privilege that it comes with. And you've always been have you always been at ease, realizing that there is inherent privilege that is attached to whiteness, and what has that meant for you? And I know you touched it earlier on about the doors that probably would not have been open for you had you not been white, but have you always been comfortable with realizing and accepting and communicating that inherent whiteness, privilege?
Pastor Sibuyile, can I tell you, it's a long journey. And I'm not a self-hating white person. I'm proud of my skin color. I have no choice about it. I'm not proud of white supremacism. I'm not proud of the evil things that white people have done, as in Nazi Germany, as in America today. So you can never stop. I'm 67 now, and I speak comfortably about white privilege. But sometimes it's a growth experience all the time. And I remember, I'm going to tell a story about Professor Loisa Nonma when he became Vice Chancellor at Wits. I was Chairman of Council. He was the first Black Vice Chancellor at Wits. We've got another Black Vice Chancellor at Wits now.
Yes.
Professor Zeblon Vilakazi.
Vilakazi, yeah.
And I remember, I wasn't at the meeting, but Professor Nonma had a meeting with young activists on campus, and he said to them, I know poverty. I tended herds on the Eastern Cape rural areas, and they said to him, we're not interested in you. Don't come to us with your stories. We want to teach you about our problems now. So I've had confrontations like that as well. I think some people listening to us, and I hope so, are feeling angry about my entitlement. And I think that entitlement, when those confrontations occur, if someone comes into our studio now and says, you're an entitled, privileged, professional white man, what are you talking to us about race for? It will be a challenge to me, but it's one that you have to humble yourself to every time. So my racial and class insights are still developing.
And then later on, I mean, we spoke about, and thanks for that, Edwin. And then, of course, we spoke about, and your sexuality. It is one thing to have to deal with that, and in a society that does not make it easy for you to accept it, but for you to get the strength to go public about it, and when it is not politically correct to do so, and it was not then, it is still not now, and but it was much worse back then, especially in the field that you are at. Talk to me about the processes that led to that decision making.
Pastor Sibuyile, it started with shame. 14 years old, I'm new at Pretoria Boys High, and I hear a radio program about people called homosexuals. And I'm filled with horror and shame. It can't be me. I refuse to accept it. But eventually, after many years, I accepted it as an inevitability, as part of me. I think that in your faith framework, you will say it is the way God made me. And that's what I believe. I believe that our sexuality is an intrinsic part of ourselves. It's not what we choose. So after my marriage to a woman failed, I decided this is it. This is me. I cannot live a lie. I cannot tell untruths. I cannot fight this thing anymore. And then I came out. I came out at almost exactly the same time as I started in practice as a lawyer. It was the turbulent 1980s. The apartheid government was getting brutal. The third force was starting operation. So, and gays and lesbians were targeted. We forget how homophobic apartheid South Africa was. And I mentioned that, Pastor Sibuyile, not to reflect with self-pity on my history, not at all. I mentioned that because the same homophobic violence, repression, raids, arrests, tortures are now being perpetrated in about 30 plus countries on our beautiful continent. So it's still a reality. And of course, it's still a reality for many people in South Africa who are still scared, who are still ashamed. But I think the theme of shame is a very important one, because it's a theme that Stephen Bantu Biko spoke about as well. Shame about blackness, shame about orientation, shame about HIV infection. And I think that shame is an important theme in our lives in South Africa. And it's difficult to talk about, but if one can talk about it, not shame that is justified, Pastor Sibu, shame that is unjustified. Unjustified shame about sexuality, unjustified shame about race, unjustified shame about infection. So that for me was the turning point, to realize I have to cast it off. As Stephen Biko said to black people, cast it off. And he said his message was important. He said to white people, Zuga, go away. We don't want you to help us with your patronizing, condescending white liberalism. You've got work to do. And I agree. I've got work to do as a white person. I've got work to do in the white community. But he said, we as black people have also got work to do. We've got to work on what he called inferiority complex about blackness, about what I call the internalized shame, which is an unjustified shame. So that for me was the turning point.
All right. Obviously, these topics are interrelated, and we'll keep coming back to them. And then, of course, deciding to come up about your HIV status, and I still remember when that happened. But on the issue of sexuality, one would say that it is. Or would you think that it is much more easier for someone that is white, for someone that is educated and with the inherent benefits that come with both those things, whiteness and education, and somebody who's got a standing in society, to come out about their sexuality, as it is for someone who is not as educated, somebody who is poor, and somebody who has no voice, and somebody who is Black, and somebody who's a woman?
I think that's true, Pastor Sivu. I think that there are race and class dimensions, and of course, that's why there was this myth about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex people, which is that they're middle class, because the first voices in South Africa, the first visible voices, were whites. But it's a myth. Throughout Africa, in fact, the LGBTI movement was fortunately taken over by Black working class people. Simon Tseko Nkosi was arrested in Sebokeng on the 4th, after the 4th of September 1984, when all the Vaal townships arose in rebellion against apartheid, and terrible things happened. There were terrible things done then. We mustn't forget that the struggle did involve terrible things. But Simon said, I'm Black, I'm fighting against apartheid, I'm fighting against poverty, but I'm also gay. So I think it was much easier for me, having come back from Oxford, starting what was a promising legal career, to say, okay, guys, I'm ready for work. I'm willing to work hard. I'm serious about my anti-apartheid work, but I'm also gay. Much easier than to do that without the house. I didn't own a house then, but I had a house in Westine and then in Brixton, and I was earning an income as an advocate. I later went to Center for Applied Legal Studies at Wits. I had a secure income as an academic. Much easier, Pastor, than someone who feels exposed, who feels unprotected by those class comforts and comforts of racial privilege.
Sure. And gender, and of course,
thank you. We haven't spoken about gender. Let's stop there for a moment. Whiteness, maleness, and privilege, comfort. Let's talk about it as well. I walk into a room and I'm a white male. I'm invested with two kinds of privilege: wrongful privilege, but real privilege, existent privilege. So you're quite right. Thanks for raising the issue of maleness.
Okay. And of course, when we say that it is easier, this is comparatively speaking, and easier than others, but still it was and still is a difficult decision. It doesn't matter who you are for you to decide to go public with who you are. I mean, we spoke about this later on. I had a friend of mine who was on this platform a couple of weeks ago, and so he was like, "So Sivu, do you want, in the introduction, that the bio that I'm about to give you, I think I did share that story with you, the bio that I'm about to, should I mention that I'm openly gay?" And I was like, why should you do that? And if it comes up in the conversation, that's okay, we'll speak about it. And at no stage where I get invited, I say, "Hi, I'm Pastor Sivu Kotela, and I'm heterosexual, and I'm straight." And I understood where he was coming from, and I respected it. But I also do think that even in our expectations, we may end up perpetuating the unfortunate narrative. Nobody owns or needs to disclose their sexuality as part of a bio. And I want to make it very clear, even to those that are watching here, the reason we mention this here, because it's an integral story of who Justice Edwin is, number one, and the work that he has done has revolved around this. And he did not need to disclose that, but it is who he is, and that has been unconditionally accepted, not just on this platform, but also in terms of our friendship. And then HIV. Man, talk to me about that. That's especially very important to me. Of course, we're going to touch about that, even though this is not my life story that we are reflecting on today. But the decision to go public about being HIV positive?
Much more difficult, Pastor Sibu. Much more difficult. As a gay man,
and you were a judge then when you did that. You were already a judge when you did that.
I was a judge.
Yeah.
I was a judge, Pastor. Much more difficult. Your homosexuality, your intersexuality, much more difficult for a transgendered person as well. But as a lesbian or gay person or bisexual person, you are affirming something of yourself. You're saying, this is my human joy. This is my human capacity. This is my human fullness. But HIV, you're talking about a tiny viral particle that has entered your blood. And you're talking about a tiny viral particle that is there against your will, and that you acquired in 99% of cases through a very intimate act. So it was much more difficult. When I was diagnosed with HIV, and that was in December 1986, I kept it a terrible secret for several years. I slowly started talking to those around me. I slowly let my family know. And then when I was nominated to become a judge, I went and spoke to South Africa's first democratic Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court. There was Chief Justice Ismail Mohammed in the appeal court before that, and Chief Justice Corbett, who was a very liberal transitional Chief Justice, the one who swore in President Mandela in April 1994. But the first Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court was Justice Arthur Chaskalson. And I went to speak to him. And I said to him, I want to tell you something. I've been nominated. I'm living with HIV. He was terribly shocked. But he said, are you well? And at that time, Pastor, one of the first cabinet ministers, the head of the Communist Party, Joe Slovo, was dying of cancer. But President Mandela appointed him. He was the first Minister of Housing. And Justice Chaskalson said to me, you could serve. We don't know when this virus will take over your body. So I didn't initially, at my first interview with the Judicial Service Commission, state my HIV status. And I was so grateful, Pastor, because of the terrible shame. It's a profound sense of shame that everyone living with HIV has to grapple with. And you don't have to do it by going public. I made my statement in front of the television cameras, in front of the nation. It was on the 7 o'clock news and the 8 o'clock news that night, the judge with AIDS. But that was much more difficult. But I want to say who inspired me. And it was 3 people. The first was Simon Nkosi, who died on the 1st of December 1998, just a few months before I decided to go public. And the other person died in the same month, also December 1998, as Simon. And she was Gugu Dlamini. And she died in the Kwamashu township of Durban, killed by her own neighbors after she spoke publicly about her status. And I realized I've got a job as a judge, I've got a judicial salary, I'm living in my home in Brixton. I had a home by then, behind a palisade fence. And this person who had none of those privileges and protections, she spoke about it. And that was the trigger. And my third inspiration was, of course, Zaki Ahmed, who, when Simon died, made a call for treatment to be available for everyone in Africa. We knew by then that 2/3 of the burden of HIV in the world would be in Africa. Not, to go back to what you were speaking about, not privileged people, not resourced people. And Zaki was living openly with HIV then. And those 3 people, I can't even say they inspired me, Pastor. I'm going to go into pastoral mode here and ask.
Sure.
They forced me, they impelled me, they shamed me in a good sense. They made it impossible for me to continue to remain silent, and then I spoke out.
And I'm so glad you did.
I'm speaking about orientation. Sorry, Pastor.
Sure.
I cut you off.
No, it's okay. And I am so glad you did. And because it is knowing that story. I mean, I remember I got to. I mean, you know this story. And one of the reasons your story is very important to me is basically how it inspired me. I remember I had. When I first discovered about my status, I was just preparing to get married, and then I was doing, what I thought was a responsible thing to do: go get tested, and then of course I discovered this was in 2007. I discovered, man, and I've told you the story, so I'm not just relating it to you now, but of course for those that are also watching. And so for 6 years, I kept it between myself, my family, my pastor and mentor, who happens to be my leader now, Pastor Papu, and a big brother of mine. And so I didn't share that. I didn't share that with anyone for a good 6 years. Kept it. And of course, there would be those awkward moments when people would say things about people that are HIV positive, and they would say it in your presence, and you know that they are talking about you without them knowing. And then what happened? And then I went to Palestine, Israel. That is actually very funny enough. That is when I went public for the first time about my status. I had not planned it. It was not in my speech. And then, but I did. I went public there, and I remember at the conclusion of my talk, I said, guys, I'm about to go back to South Africa, but people don't know about this. So just before you share the videos and everything, allow me to go back home. There are a couple of people that I need to speak to before I go public. And so I relate to your story. So I called my then conference leadership, president and executive secretary, because I remember I was at the seminary now. I was about to become a pastor next year, the following year. And so they were doing routine interviews with would-be pastors the following year. And so called them in, sat down with them. I said, guys, there's something I need to tell you. I have knowingly been living with HIV for the last 6 years. And but that is not why I am telling you this now. But I have decided to go public about it. And I think they meant well. I'm not going to mention their names, they know themselves, but I think they meant well. And they try to raise the concerns about having a pastor that is HIV positive, and the public perception about that, and the potential that it might, harm my ministry. And to their credit, though, both of them, to their credit, though, number one, the following year, because my point to them was this: look, if you're uncomfortable with employing me as a pastor and I'm HIV positive, I will understand that. I really am. I will understand. You've already done so much. You've given me a scholarship. I'm finishing my theology degree. I don't need to work for the church to be a pastor. You've already done enough. If you're not comfortable, maybe the church is not ready, I understand. It's fine, but I've made up my mind. To their credit, though, I was employed the following year, and I did go public as I had planned, and they were supportive. And I don't think there are any doors that were closed because of my HIV status. And so one of the people that made it possible for me to make that decision, as I said to you, it is you and this book and Witness to AIDS, and to have somebody who is occupying a position of moral authority to be able to put that aside and do what they felt they needed to do. Of course, this is not about me, so I will not here share what that has meant for my ministry. and the doors that it has opened, and how it has made it possible for people who are struggling with their own issues privately to open up to me at a personal level. Do you, and then maybe that's the question that I want to raise to you. What is outside of you, in your justice ministry, what has that meant for how people see you after you went public about your HIV status and before you went public?
Can I just pause for a moment, Pastor? I know you say it's not about you, but what you've told is very moving to me. The intimate relationship you're about to enter, the way you shared it with those around you, your journey of not speaking for 6 years, and then coming to the point where you were going to speak. And I might say I had the same experience. Justice Chaskelson eventually encouraged me to speak out. But I must say that I think your story is an extraordinary one. And I know this is not about you, but I want to go into interview mode just for a moment, because you mentioned my book. And you have told me, I don't know whether it's known on this platform, that you're also writing. Yeah. So that's the interview mode. I'm absolutely overjoyed, because I think that story of your growth into personhood, your growth into fullness as a human being, your spiritual quest, your encounter with HIV, your diagnosis, your struggle, and then your decision to speak is of enormous importance. And I will rejoice when that book is ready to appear. I really am. I hope you don't mind me appropriating your interview platform just to say those things.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much, Edwin. I appreciate that. But then there's a question that I ask you.
So yes, you asked what it meant to me to those. Can I recast your question? This is now me being a lawyer.
Sure.
Wait up.
Go ahead.
I understand your question to be, what did those factors in my life of poverty, whiteness, homosexuality, and infection with HIV do to my life? And what they've all done is to, I hope, keep me humble. I hope keep me knowing that every single thing, the warm house that you see here, is a privilege. It's not merited. It might be earned in some way. And then more importantly, Pastor Sivu, it's that that your life has meaning through others. I know that it's the well-known concept of Ubuntu, but it is a profound concept, and it's not just a catchword, and it's not just a politically correct phrase, but your life has meaning through your engagement with, and for me, service to others. And that's why I was a LGBTI activist. That's why I was an AIDS activist. That's why I worked for human rights under apartheid. And that's why I still do the work I do. And I don't mean to sound sanctimonious or justified in all of that, but that's what impels me, a sense that you have been given privileges that you are called to utilize. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, no, definitely. Thank you so much. And let's come to your work. And we spent half of this conversation, and by the way, we're not apologetic about that, because most of the work has been published. We see it on TV, we see it on radio and the newspapers, but we wanted to go behind that, who is the man behind all the headlines. And I'm glad we've managed to do that. And I see Lungelo Wadlelane, what a sincere and brave man. I admire Judge Cameron for his courage to boldly disclose both his HIV status and sexuality so many years ago. Thanks for this, the Real Village. Keep it real. Thank you so much. And then, oh, of course, we've got your colleague, your former colleague, Selby Mbenenge.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, I think I did mention to you that he is serving as our patron of the Real Village.
Wonderful.
And we have Debbie Oliver saying, "I'm excited to hear." Me too, excited. And,
hello, Debbie.
And Beauty Cotella, let me take my front row seat. And then, of course, maybe we need to touch on this. Beauty raises this again. That shame is now creeping up, sadly, with COVID-19. You want to comment on that?
That's why it was so important for the Mandela family to say last week that Zinzi died after being diagnosed, because there is no shame in viral infection, Pastor. But you're right, and it's when we fear other people because of their contagion, we have got to be rational about it. We've got to wear our masks. We've got to practice safe sex. We've got to do all of those things. But our fear of contagion must take rational countermeasures. They mustn't take the form of that terrible 6-letter word, Pastor, which is stigma.
Sure.
And that stigma has stigmatized Black people because of race. It's stigmatized LGBTI people because of sexuality, and it's stigmatizing people with COVID. And of course, the link, the vulnerability to COVID is enormous. Again, in the issue that you raised earlier, because of poverty, people don't have the ability to socially distance when they're living in a 6 or 7 room person, one room shack. So you're right to raise that, and thank you for raising it.
And thank you for raising that as well. And sometimes we forget that the ability to stay at home, as you've aptly said, and even by implication, the ability to stay at home and social distance and to be under lockdown for a week, for a month, and not need something outside of your house is actually a privilege. There are people who don't know what they're going to be eating tomorrow. And sometimes when we look at them, they are roaming in the streets, we think that they're irresponsible. But actually, it's because they are very responsible that they are outside. Otherwise, the family would die of hunger there and poverty. And I guess COVID-19 has also, put that on the platform, the issue of systematic inequalities that are existing.
I think that's right. And I think you're raising a deeper point as well, Pastor Sibu, which is that we aren't fully human unless we can understand, not with condescension, but with humility, the position of other people. Unless and the good book, all the most important moral, ethical frameworks of our human civilization teach us that you have to understand yourself in other people and what their lives are.
Your work now. Okay. Your work. 2 words. I think law and has been synonymous with your name the rest of your life. And of course, we're going to touch this now. We're going to end this with your work as the Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. Now let's go to your work as in the law, the legal fraternity. There are many cases, of course, that would be mentioned alongside your name, but there have got to be those cases, those judgments, those pronouncements that are the highlight of your career. Do you want to share some of those?
I would love to. You did signal to me that you might ask me this, Pastor Sibu. The first judgment I'd like to mention is one that my colleague Justice Sisi Kampepe delivered, and it was about mine workers. Our country's infrastructure was built on cheap labor, and you cannot say the words cheap labor in South Africa without racializing it, cheap Black labor. And may I also say, because another form of stigma in our country is against cross-border migrants. Cheap black labor from Malawi, from Mozambique, from Eswatini, from Lesotho, and from the Eastern Cape, from KwaZulu-Natal, from Polokwane. So Judge Kampepe wrote a vital judgment in her first years on the Constitutional Court, in which she interpreted a statutory provision that said that if you were a mine worker, you are entitled to proper compensation. You're not going to get 16,000 rand and sent back to Kunu or to somewhere to die of your respiratory disease, which you picked up in the mines. And that eventually culminated in a massive 6 billion rand settlement. So I think Justice Kampepe's judgment in the Makanya cases of very Mankai, forgive me. It's a Xhosa surname, not the Zulu Makanya. It's Mankai. And then two other cases I'd like to mention. Justice Dikgang Moseneke, Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke, one of the people I'm proudest to call a colleague and a friend. We heard a challenge to the abolition of the Scorpions and a challenge to the New Hawks administration, which President Jacob Zuma, the first things that his administration did was to close down the effective corruption busting unit and to put what I think was a little mouse in its place. And as we came out of court, Justice Moseneke said to me, we were 9 people sitting. He said, this is not right. So I said, well, I feel the same as you. Shall we work on a judgment together? We were 2, then we were 3, and then we were 4, and then we were 5. Justice Nkabinde, Justice Tembile Skwiya, Justice Fruneman all came with us. And eventually it was the Glenister judgment 5-4 that said if you've got a corruption busting unit, it has to be a real thing. It can't be a mouse. It's got to have teeth. It's got to have independence. Then lastly, Pastor, on the day that I stepped down, it wasn't my last judgment, but the day I stepped down, I gave a judgment about land. And it's a judgment that tells the tragedy of our country, because under Mandela, there were wonderful statutes enacted, and the Labour Tenants Act was a particularly wonderful statute. It said that if you are on someone else's land, and you, in that sentence, are almost always black, and someone else is almost always white, you get 2 things. The first thing is you get security of tenure on the land that you are farming, your plot of maize and where your livestock is and your homestead. You cannot just be chased off. For 300 years, you could be chased off. You get tenure, but more security, and more importantly, the Labour Tenants Act said you can get property ownership. You can get transfer of that land right to the land department, and the land department will process your claim. And if the farmer or the owner doesn't agree that you must get those few acres or more acres, 50 acres, hectares, I don't know how much it is, then it goes to the land claims court. And nearly 30,000 people applied. And what happened? Nothing. Why did it happen? Because of us. We, democratic South Africa, inefficiency, corruption, hopelessness in the land department. And on the day I stepped down, we gave a unanimous judgment, all of us, Chief Justice Mogoeng, and we gave a judgment saying that the land department had to get its act into order, and we appointed a special master. The judge in the Labour Court granted that order, the appeal court overturned it, and we reinstated the order. We said, this has got to happen. So I feel that judgment too is the one that I'd like to make. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you so much. I wish we could also talk about your work as a human rights lawyer during apartheid.
Well, you know, there weren't any heroes under the law, Pastor. I think the heroes were the people on the streets, the activists and trade unionists, the people who were organizing, and the lawyers were doing their work. We were showing an important point that Mandela and Tambo believed, which is that the law could be used as an instrument of justice. And that question hasn't left us. Are we using the law now as an instrument of justice when we are beating up people in the township, when we are locking people up, when we've got overcrowded prisons? So that question remains for us in democratic constitutional South Africa. But that was the work that anti-apartheid lawyers did. And I was not the most prominent of them, and I wasn't the proudest of them, but I did work very, very hard, and I did work in many cases which I think had an impact on people's lives, but I'm not boastful about it.
Your colleague here, good evening, yes. Justice Cameron. Would you confidently say the courts in South Africa have been successful in upholding social justice without encroaching on the executive arm of government?
That is a beautiful lawyer's question.
I'm sure.
And the answer, my beloved colleague Mbenenge, is that I don't think so. I think that it's always a path that we have to walk. I think the courts necessarily, like in the judgment I gave last August about labor tenants, sometimes the courts have to take the executive by the scruff of the neck and say, get a move on. But I think on the whole, to answer the substance of your question, I think that the courts have been very respectful of executive power, very respectful of parliamentary power. But I would really have loved Judge Mbenenge to be here now so that we could debate that further. He asked a very, very crafty lawyer's question, and I've not fully answered it, but I think the answer has many shades, and thank you for asking that question.
All right. And then Juba Kuzwayo, wow, what a man. This interview is like a breath of fresh air. Tell him I worked for AFRA last year and was privileged to witness his work, in particular the impactful, groundbreaking judgment, his last judgment, that will forever change the lives of labor tenants. We've just spoken about that.
Thank you so much, Juba. That's a wonderful affirmation. It was the Mulase judgment. Don't let us forget that Mr. Mulase died while he was waiting for the transfer of his piece of land, which the statute already in 1996 said that he could have. But I'm delighted to hear that Juba Kutswaya worked for AFRA, because AFRA was the NGO that brought the case.
Thanks, Juba. And Ayanda Mlindi Mdokwana says, your ability to open yourself to the forces of discrimination coming out of both with your sexual orientation and HIV status is a learning experience, regardless of the privilege that made things better. I mean that made things better is impressive. I don't know if I read that rightly. I say this because you did not need to, as Pastor Kotela mentioned, this is even an eye-opening and learning experience for the less privileged. Thanks for this interview.
Thank you, Ayanda. Thank you for the affirmation. And can I say, Pastor, that once we speak with pride in ourselves, as a white person, as a black person, as a gay person, as a straight person, as someone living with HIV or not living with HIV, we liberate ourselves, but we also liberate other people. And the information that Ayanda Mlindi has just sent in is the kind of affirmation I've got about my HIV status. The morning after I made my public statement, I received an overwhelming effusion of affirmation from all over Africa. And I still get it. People stop me at the airport, in the street, and they say, thank you for doing that. So it has been a journey of affirmation, and I'm grateful to Ayanda for the wonderful words.
Thank you. And Debbie Olivier, as a white woman, I'm acutely aware of my historical privilege. I am compelled to rectify injustice by making it my life purpose to create opportunities of excellence for the African child.
What a wonderful statement. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. and of course for all children as well. But we have to look at where the historical burden of injustice and exclusion has lain and where the privilege has lain. So you're right to mention the African child.
And she's doing incredible work. I know her because she's my wife's boss, who commented earlier on beauty, and they are both working for Stellenbosch University, and we've got to touch that as well.
I didn't know that. Debbie, yeah. Nice to meet you as a colleague.
And they do that through the work called, TREC, in your institution. Now, let's speak to you about that role as Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. So much that it carries, both good and bad, and from the past, and any specific plans? I mean, look, I've got to admit, as somebody that has been following the institution, and like I mentioned, because my wife works there, but also I've got many friends that are working there, and I really admire the good work that the university has done historically, and that is doing even now. But sadly, and maybe even justifiably, even today, the name Stellenbosch University, it seems like it will always be associated with the apartheid project. How do you overcome that? Do you need to overcome that? And how do you make sure that we learn from what has happened and not dismiss the incredible contribution that the university is making today because of the unfortunate relationship that it has with the apartheid project?
I think it is in the process of doing that, Pastor Sibu. I think that the rector, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Wim de Villiers, is doing it. I think that his council and his executive team have a very keen awareness of that. As for my role, I have got two poles, and they were the Chancellor at Wits when I became Chairman of Council at the end of 1997, and the Chancellor who took over from him, who was Justice Dikgang Moseneke. And the Chancellor was Justice Richard Goldstone, and he was not very involved. He was the ceremonial head of Wits. He was a very distinguished man, internationally renowned, and he came to graduation ceremonies, but he never got involved with the nitty-gritty or the hard, difficult confrontational issues. Dikgang, on the other hand, my goodness, when the campuses erupted in 2015, what did Dikgang do? Did he step aside? Did he stand back? Did he run away? He did the opposite. He convened that meeting in Midrand, which at Gallagher Estate, which didn't end well because some people were determined to wreck it, much to my grief. And Dikgang spoke out. He spoke about the violence and the coercion and the intimidation and the destruction of property. He spoke out against it. He also, as someone who spent 10 years on Robben Island, sentenced as a 15-year-old, he spoke about the need for the campuses to transform. So I've got those two poles. Where in the middle of those two poles of titular headship and hands-on involvement, I will be is something for us to discover. And I'm not evading your question, but thank you.
All right. Okay. And look, I'm a pastor, so we can't speak for an hour without specifically speak on spirituality, on faith. Now, the background on this, it may have come up in our conversations in the past, is that I honestly, now I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as you know, and I sum up spirituality as love that we have for God, as shown in us loving His children. That is the highest form of spirituality, to love the Creator and show that love in loving His creation. His creation means exactly that. And then, of course, high on that creation are human beings. And you can't love God that you have not seen, but cannot love His children. Now I believe then that the work that I do and my Christian faith forces me to live a life of service. It inspires me to do that. And Jesus Christ in particular inspires the work that I do, not just at a theoretical level, but it is someone that I go to as for inspiration, number one, but also for strength and capacity for me to unconditionally love others despite their response to that love, because I have been loved unconditionally by him. And a Christian writer, Ellen White, says, he who gives without going back to the source of giving will soon give no more. And that source of giving for me is my Christian faith. And in particular, it is Jesus Christ. And I look at somebody like you who has consistently over the years used his education, used his voice, used his platform to give to others, especially those that do not, let me not say do not have a voice, because everybody has got a voice, but others, sadly, their voices are quieted because of their race, because of their gender, because of their education status, but somebody who amplifies their voice. And you've been doing that. Surely, I don't know, you must be getting that strength from somewhere outside of you.
You put me on the spot, Pastor. I would say it's a deep sense of gratitude that moves me. It's I do not operate from a faith framework, but I operate from a framework of profound reverence and awe at the wonder of creation. We don't even begin to understand the cosmic mysteries of which we are part. The wonder of the creation on earth, animals and nature, and humanity, and the complexity of humanity. And for me, it's a sense of two things: gratitude for what I have, and gratitude also for the opportunities to make a difference. You put me on the spot because you actually asked me at an earlier time. You said you get the love from a source and then you give it. And I've been thinking about that, and I'm going to continue thinking about that because you put me on the spot. For me, there is not a faith framework to that source of love and commitment and passion and dedication, but it's one that I share with you, with humility.
Of course, this is the platform about Africa, to reconstruct and empower Africa. And we've got to end now because you've got your next conversation. But tell me, your next appointment that you need to rush to. Very shortly, your vision for Africa, and your vision for Africa. And I know you're not a politician, but what are you proud about Africa, and what are some of the things that keep you awake at night, that worry you about our continent?
I am proud. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, and what can we do to
the ingenuity and energies of the African peoples everywhere? But I'm not proud of our governance systems, which have kept people back, Pastor Sibuyile. So I think that with the correct governance systems, with the correct principles, with the correct accountability. Look at Nigeria. It could have been one of the most wealthy countries in the world, but with absent governance systems, we've got a chance in South Africa, and I believe we're going to make it work. We've got a chance with our history. We've got a chance with our constitution. We've got a chance with our young people. I worked with law clerks for 11 years at the Constitutional Court. It was the best. I'm not dissing my colleagues. The best thing about my 11 years in the Constitutional Court were the young people that I worked with. And with those young people, most of them black, I think that we are going to have a future despite the terrible challenges that we're facing now. Even in the face of those challenges, we have got a future as Africans, and I believe in that with passion.
All right, let's close this off now. Your favorite African destination?
The Kalahari Desert.
Your favorite dish? Meal? Does not have to be African.
No, you know that my partner in Tlantla introduced me this week to okra, which I hadn't eaten before. But he knows so I'm vegetarian, partly out of respect for what the meat industry is doing to our planet and to the animals it slaughters. Industrial production of animals. I'm not talking about traditional slaughter. So my favorite dish would be a beautiful vegetable stew with potatoes and okra and delicious things inside it.
Mm.
I know I'm probably talking to a lot of meat eaters, but plant-based protein is delicious too.
Sure. Let me just be naughty and ask, what is Nhlanhla's favorite meal?
Nhlanhla is a fish eater, and he makes the most wonderful fish stews, in which I very occasionally participate.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yes,
now tell me your favorite song?
I'll think, because someone sent it to me this morning. Asim Bonanga with Johnny Clegg, where President Mandela unexpectedly comes onto the stage. And it's a 6-minute video that's very easily accessible.
Beautiful. It's timeless. It's classic. And your favorite book? Well, what are you reading currently?
I'm currently reading Johnny Steinberg. I just finished The Number, which is about prison gangs, and he wrote a book, A Town Called Bethlehem, and I'm just starting on that at the moment.
And your favorite
in these last questions.
I know.
I'm glad you put me on the spot for the last 10-15 minutes, and I'm glad about that.
It's about to end. And your favorite life mantra or quotation that you live by, or that often comes to mind?
Keep going. You have energies for it. I think we all have unexpected energies, and we find those energies through affirmation from other people.
All right. Justice Edwin, thank you so much for your time. I told you earlier on, I have not worn this t-shirt in years. A friend of mine is a professor now, Willie Chinyamurindi. While he was in the UK, he got me this. I haven't worn it in years, but I wanted to make a statement today, because this is what you represent: living intentionally versus just existing. Thank you for your life. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for making this world a better place.
Thank you, Pastor Sivu. It's been a wonderful hour with you. And thank you for your participants as well. Inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, man.
Good night, everyone.
I trust that everybody, you did enjoy that conversation. I walk away with so much from it. Incredible. And thank you so much for joining us. And I will see you next week, as we shall be sitting down in the real dialogue, conversations changing the content, with another person that loves and spends all that they have and who they are to make this world a better place. And in the words